Hello and welcome to the TFF podcast by Fantasy Football Hub, our first episode of the 2022-23 season as we talk all things Telegraph fantasy football. My name is Fergie and I am joined as usual by two superb Telegraph fantasy managers. Firstly, Luke Wilson. Great to see you again, Luke. Happy haircut, by the way. And how's your summer and how's it going with you?
I don't think it's a haircut. I think it's my hairline receding.
Happy hair loss.
Very good, thank you, mate. A bit busy at the moment. Changed jobs a few weeks ago, but yeah, all good. Looking forward to the new season, though.
How did your season finish after? Because I think on the last pod you were roughly 200 or 300. How did you end up after?
Yeah, I think I had one team that was just outside top 200 and one that was about 150th in the end. So all right, but there was a point where I was thinking, hang on, I've got a good chance, and it just didn't happen. So
Didn't materialise.
Yeah. Few 50-50s as always. So
always the bridesmaid behind me and you, buddy, in this. The last 3 seasons now, I think. So we've got some catching up to do this year now, Luke. Come on.
Here we go.
Here we go. And we also have the Hub's resident statistician, Carl Weeks. Welcome, Carl. How has your summer been and how's things with you?
Yeah, no, summer's been great, if not a bit on the hot side, but I'm sure that's the same for everybody. Really looking forward to the new season. I can't believe it's just around the corner.
Fantastic, isn't it? So excited.
It is. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. I just see so many fantastic signings.
Yeah.
There's going to be so many great matches, and I can't wait to get stuck in. I just wish it would cool down a little bit so I could really get stuck into some analysis. But I'm afraid I just get too tired at the moment. But yeah, it's a little while yet to get myself sorted, but raring to go.
I'm so excited for this season. I think it's either the 4th or 5th year that there's been a pretty standard clear summer of no football, because obviously there's been like World Cup, Euros, Project Restart. All the players and all us as fantasy managers have had a couple of months off football, off Premier League or international football, and I feel completely and utterly recharged and refreshed. And I think this is the most excited I've been for the start of a season for a long, long time. I am absolutely buzzing for it. As you say, all the teams have improved. Fantastic new signs in the Premier League. All the best players, all the best managers. I think it's going to be an incredible season. And as a Spurs fan as well, I'm particularly excited. I'm sure we'll talk a bit of Spurs. How did your season finish off after, Carl?
I think I probably just sort of tailed away. It wasn't the best of seasons. But I sort of got distracted, as I sort of mentioned on another pod, about some workings that I was sort of doing to improve, to be prepared much more for this season, and to use a bit more analysis and optimization to pick my teams. So even though last year was poor, I'm after your crown this season. And I really think I've already selected my team, as you see so far later on, and it's the most optimistic I've been for a long time going into the season. So I feel very confident.
Lovely stuff. That is fighting talk. That is it, Carl. I look forward to seeing your draft later and copying you. Yeah, I've had a great summer. Went off to Turkey for a week with the family just a week after the season finished, which was great. I'm going away next week as well, actually, for a rearranged kind of extended family holiday that's been canned for the last 2 or 3 years. So pretty excited. Had a great break. In terms of TFF last year, I had my best season, and I think it's a couple of cases of what could have been, because I should have been 20 points better off. Those who watched the last pod of last season will remember the Kane debacle when I was actually with Luke in Bristol, and I was a bit drunk downstairs in one of the pubs, and it was Kane against Man City, and I was chatting to Luke and a few other guys, and I missed the deadline by about 20 seconds because there was only 3G down there instead of 4G, and Kane went and scored 2 goals, which cost me 12 points, so that was a killer. And I also missed another transfer, but that was more. I should have done it, but I did actually peak last season at 4th overall. I was hovering around 12th and 13th for the last month or so, but I did actually finish the end around 41st, which I'm still really pleased with. But What
Yeah,
could
you
have
see,
been.
talking about sliding doors moment, because you not doing Kane, I think that put me ahead of you at
It
that
did.
point, and
It
that was
did.
only about 8 weeks or 9 weeks from the end of the season. So you can see how mine dropped. Obviously, you almost finished
That's
fourth.
right. Um,
So
yeah, and talking about overall ranks and stuff. I mean, my goodness, let's just quickly read a couple of things out. So, first, for our YouTube watchers, if you haven't subscribed yet, please press the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen to ensure you don't miss anything. We also have all the Sky Fantasy stuff on this YouTube channel as well. If you are enjoying or you do enjoy our content, please press like. You can also join Fantasy Football Hub for 50% off now, and if you don't win your FPL mini league, you get your money back. So you can check out the site now for all the amazing fantasy football resources and the T's and C's around the money back offer. Just on that, if you're not sure about the benefits of being a premium Fantasy Football Hub member, take a look at this mini league from last year and the overall rank. So this mini league is the Fantasy Football Hub £200 members league. So we give free cash leagues in all formats. And Peter Marshall won this mini league. Premium Hub member. He also won the whole game, £5,000. Second place, James Bailey in this mini league. He also came second in the whole game. We also had Lewis Stevenson finish sixth. We also had 14th, 17th, 21st, 26th, 31st, 43rd, 47th. For some reason, me and Paul McNulty are not in there, but we actually finished, I think it was 41st and 42nd respectively as well. But that is, 13 managers in the top 50, and they're all in our Fantasy Football Hub WhatsApp group. I mean, if you're not on there and you're serious about playing and winning at TFF, it's right in front of you. The link is in the description below. 50% off for premium membership. Just get it done. Get it done, for goodness sake. We are all in there chatting all the time, and we can help you win your mini leagues and have your best ever Telegraph season. Enough of the promo. Let's move on. And for this podcast, we have got oodles. I don't use that word very often, but I will use oodles of stuff to chat about, starting with what we can learn from last season's data and how this will impact our decision making for our Game Week 1's teams and strategies. We will then look at the best players for our Game Week 1 teams, including the newly promoted teams, before going through masses of questions and sharing our first drafts with you. And as a bonus, we also have some drafts from last year's winner and Hub Premium member, Peter Marshall, who's currently on holiday, spending his winnings to share at the end. So firstly, just before we start off looking at the points, actually, interested, Luke, if I can firstly ask you, what are your overall thoughts firstly of the game? So the two, I suppose, changes, just to mention before we start, they scrapped the 2-hour rule between transfers now. That's the first thing. Actually, that is the only the change in the rules. So I said 2 rules, there's only been 1 change. What is your overall thoughts of the game this season?
My biggest thing, so the 2-hour rule is good, because that got me. If you remember, I lost, I think Jared Bowen got 2 and an assist as well. So you know you're talking about that Kane one, because I brought him in. That was annoying, but so I think that's a good change. The thing I am most mindful of is that we're going into the World Cup, and post World Cup we don't have an overhaul or wild card like we've got in other games. So my normal, I don't want to use more than 10 before Christmas. I think the one thing I'm going to try and do, and you'll see it in my team, is I've pretty much picked a team that I think could go through without any transfers. I might take 1 or 2 transfers because I've got enough budget to take a big hitter, and I'll come on to that. I think that's the main thing, is that I'm going far safer in my starting 11 pick, because my determination is to just make maybe 2-3 transfers for injuries going between now and the World Cup, just in case, half my team gets injured there. And then I'm going to really attack it after that, I think.
What are your initial takes, Carl?
Very much the same as Luke in terms of the 2-hour rule. I think it's great, and I didn't realise until last year that I didn't actually understand it properly. So, it just goes to show it wasn't the best rule anyway. So I'm glad that's gone, and it makes things easier That's a great thing. Um, I, no other rules. There's always the question about the right pricing, and some players may be mispriced or being a bit cheap, and the overall distribution, which I'm sure we'll get onto a little bit later. I'm not overly worried about the World Cup, about not having an overhaul. I haven't thought deeply enough about, will it make a difference? And I was thinking about it a little bit, and how much of a difference will it make? Probably not that much, especially if you've got players like Salah and Haaland and the like who aren't even going. So maybe they're good players to have because they'll be even fresher than everybody else. But yeah, I'm happy otherwise.
Yeah, really good points, and agree on the 2 hour rule. I think the price. I think the big change I can see from this year to last year is now a lot of the premium midfielders are now strikers. So people like Salah and Son, which is a big change. Even I think Havertz, Kulusevski, Diaz for Liverpool, they're all classed as forwards now, which is really interesting. So I do think we'll see quite a big shift in the dynamic of what makes up a good team, because my initial instincts looking through it, and we'll dive into the data. These are just initial instincts, but it's to probably go quite heavyish still at the back. I think there's 1 or 2 cheap defenders that'll help. Maybe look for bonus magnets. So that's probably another thing to add. I think that the save and tackle bonus implemented last year were absolutely brilliant. I really do think they were fantastic, and they really added an extra dimension to picking players. Look at like Christian Norgard. He is now a Telegraph and fantasy, a bit of a staple almost. Players like that, again, we'll touch on that in a bit. And maybe because if you want now, it's very hard to go without Salah, Kane, Haaland, Son, etc. They're all very expensive. So that's a kind of way I see it. But I think overall, like I say, it's very exciting. They've topped up the prices for a lot of the premium defenders. Reece James was far too cheap last year, 3.9. Rudiger was 3.8. They've topped all those up now as well. Premium keepers are still very expensive. So yeah, I'm very excited for it, and I think we're going to see quite a wide variety of teams. Because the player pool is just so massive, as it is in all formats. That's just my initial instincts, I suppose. But let's look at the data then. So what Carl has prepared for us here, as usual, is the top point scorers from last season, but based on this season's prices. So what are your key sort of takeaways from this, Carl?
Yeah, I'd like to address one point that you made a second ago, and that's about the reclassification of some of the players like Salah and moving them all as forwards. And to me, I'm not sure if that's the best thing for the game, in the sense that previously you'd have had the bonus magnets that we sort of talked about, and it's a choice: do you go for the bonus magnets or do you go for Salah and that sort of stuff? And you had to use your skill because there weren't very many strikers. Whereas now the strikers become a bit more obvious, and there's not as many premium midfielders maybe to choose from.
Good point.
Anyway, going to the screen itself, the very first list is just the top point scorers, and you can virtually close your eyes and list by position who you think would be top, and then open them, and they probably would be top in terms of best goalkeepers, Addison, and then Edison for Man City, top defenders, VVD, Cancelo, TAA, Robinson, Laporte, etc., etc. Similar with midfielders and strikers, because you've got Salah and Son and Kane as your best strikers, Bowen, KVB, Mount, Maddison, Saka. So all popular household names all the players that we want. So there's not a huge takeaway from this slide. You'll get more interest in the next slide when we start looking for a bit of gem. If you go down to defenders, there's 1 or 2 names that sort of pop out a little bit. Gay from Crystal Palace and Cody are quite high up on the defenders. So those are 2 names that sort of jumped out at me. The other thing that you will notice, or is a key statistic in my eyes, is it's either points per million or points per million per game, and I tend to look for points per million per game as an indicator, and the defenders, even the premium ones, are quite high. It's like 1.1 for all the top defenders. Midfielders, they're also quite high, but lower, and then slightly lower again for the strikers. So it tends to look like there may be better to spend your money in the defence than there is elsewhere. I don't know if you've had a look and got anything else that jumped out at yourself.
Yeah, I love looking at these because there's always some players who immediately jump out, and the ones kind of jump out on me definitely fit from these second two lists. I'm not interested, for example, in Nathaniel Klein or even Kilman from Wolves. Maybe I should be, but they just don't excite me or get me interested. We're not interested in Gahey from Palace. A couple of players, Eric Dyer, 3.2, because I do think Spurs this year are going to improve again. He's nailed. He's got a bit of attacking threat. I think they'll keep clean sheets. 3.2 million, and he was fifth in that list for points per million scorers from last year. So I think he jumps out straight away. And on the points per game, points per million per game list, Zinchenko at Man City, 3.2. Obviously, we know he's gone to Arsenal, but he's on that list. You'd probably expect him. I think he costs 30 million. Expect him to play at Arsenal either at left back or maybe in a different role. But he again at 3.2 looks really good there potentially. And another one is Doherty at Spurs as well. Now they've just signed Jed Spence, who's coming at 3.1, but Doherty is only 3.4. And I think if Doherty plays on that right-hand side regularly, which I get the feeling he might start the season there, I think he could be an absolute steal because he's a goal and assist machine when he's on form. And before he got injured last year, he was in everyone's FPL team, wasn't he, and things, because he was just flying. So I think they're three players straight away that I take from those lists as I think they're underpriced for the potential they give. What are your immediate thoughts there, Luke, in kind of keepers in defence anyway, I suppose?
So, I mean, in defence, I think you've kind of covered everybody. I'm trying to think who one of the top. Ben Davies finished the season really strongly, but I think they've just signed the centre back, didn't they? I think they got it over the line a couple of days ago. So I suspect he'll drop out, which is a shame. He was in my draft until Sunday, actually, because he's 2.9. I mean, if he does play, he got 115 points, but he did not play that many games last season. So he got, I think, a couple of assists as well as that. He's good on the set pieces when he does take a few from memory as well. He's got a good left foot. So yeah, I think Zinchenko. I mean, you've kind of stolen the ones I'd spotted actually, like Zinchenko. I'm convinced he'll be playing. I can't see them dropping Tierney, so Zinchenko will probably be playing centre midfield. And if he plays the same way he plays for Ukraine, he is he's a ticky-tacky player, so he's going to get his fair share of assists. And at 3.2, in a good team, he's going to get more assists by playing more regularly, and he gets the clean sheets. Problem is, he's going to miss out on the tackle bonus that he could have got for playing midfield. So I'm not sure. I mean, I would think the clean sheet's probably worth more. So I think he's well underpriced for a regular starter in an Arsenal defence, effectively at 3.2. I can't quite fit him in with what I'm planning on my team at the moment. If he was 0.1 cheaper, so I'm thinking about that. I'll come on to that in my team. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where I'm at with defenders. I think there will be one or two that come through at the sort of 2.5, 2.4 range. Again, I'm less worried about jumping them early. I think post World Cup, I'm kind of thinking that. Do you want me? Because there was one that stood out to me, and actually it's borne out completely in the stats that I think is unbelievably underpriced. So it's not a defender. So I think there's two players that really stand out for being underpriced for me. One of which is Diaz at Liverpool,
Okay.
right? Because he's, I think, from memory, 4.9.
I think he's 5 million, but yeah.
No. Just check 4.9.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, come on, get your facts right.
Apologies, buddy.
You know, uh, but so if he wasn't so much cheaper than Salah, he would be one up front because I am playing 5-4-1. Dan James at Leeds at 3 million, especially with some of the players that have left, he's going to be playing, right? 3 million for a striker. The point, I mean, I think he's top of the value chart. I'm just checking so he's top of both points per million and points per million per game at that price from the 103 he got last season. Like that is a ridiculous price for a regular player. Like he should be about 3.84 million. So if you do want to play just one up top, I mean, I think Diaz is going to smash it. I hope he is. But yeah, I think Dan James at 3 million at that price that's just bonkers price.
I've got a cheaper.
Sorry, Piers. I did note Dan James myself mentally, and I think he was the midfielder last year, and that his points total would have included tackle bonuses. So some of the points for the strikers may be slightly inflated.
You ever seen Dan James?
I was going to say he's not renowned for being a tough tackler.
I was going to say I don't think I've ever seen him track back, let alone tackle.
Oh, you must be joking! Didn't you see that? I say tackle. I wouldn't even call it a tackle. The assault he did on
the assault.
Yeah. And it's like, he does run around, and they tried to put the boot in, tried to challenge. I think that's their ethos, is press. So I imagine there's a few points in there. But yeah,
I've got a cheaper starting striker, which I'll touch on later if you're desperate to save some funds. I'll do it later. I'll try and let everyone think until we get to that section.
Sure. Can I just sort of say add to my comments, because I didn't realise we was talking about all three together.
Yeah, go
on. On the second slide, which is points, total points divided by million, is the most useful slide to me, because it's where you can delve in and talk about the value players. And if you're trying to look for enablers, this is where you would go and scan your eyes for the cheap prices. And the ones that sort of jump out as cheap prices for me are the midfielders. Yeah. And that's where you're going to tend to get the biggest value, with Norgard top of the pile, as you sort of mentioned him before, and Romero of Southampton. Of course, I don't know his playing style, but there are quite a few players there that are quite budget and would be worth bringing in, because they're very good value. And the third slide, which isn't so great, but it's still useful, is top points divided by millions per game. And most of these are the Waifs and Sways who played 10 games, have done fairly well, and therefore but should be discarded. But there may be a few gems in there for people who've been injured and missed games. So a player that doesn't pop up on the previous two lists in gold is David Raya. You can go down, you've got Chalobah of Chelsea, if you think he's going to sort of break into the side, though that looks less likely now. And Bruno of Newcastle, because he was bought in the summer, so he didn't pick up enough points to make it into the first two charts. But when you take him as a whole for the limited time he played, he's second on that list of midfielders. So that chart is a very good one to go through. And again, the midfielders is a very interesting list, because you've got some names in there who could be very good if, I don't know whether it's from injury or other reasons. So you've got Basuma of Brighton, who's now gone to Spurs, picks up a lot of tackles. He didn't have the matches last year, but if you think he's going to be a regular starter, he's 3 million.
Well, he got 78 tackles last year, which was roughly the same as Højbjerg, Decore, Rodri, Allen, and Romeo, and I think he played 20 games potentially or around that. So basically, just over half the season. If he'd have played all season, he would have probably been the top tackler in the league. So I think Basuma at 3 million, if you think he's going to play, and bear in mind he has got some attacking threat as well, I think it'd be an absolute steal. I'm not sure in that Spurs midfield. So they've got Højbjerg. I think Højbjerg played every game last season. They signed Bentancur, who went under the radar. He's actually a very, very good footballer. And they've got Bissouma. So I'm not sure which two out of those three are going to start the season. So that's just one thing to watch out on, because Bentancur, I think he had 2 assists in the last game of the season, as well as being, a real hard man in the centre. So I'm not sure who's going to start, but I can't see them signing Bissouma to stick him on the bench. It's just whether they start him, in game week 1 onwards it's a tough one.
See, last one to chuck into the mix, which he comes out on the per game per million, is Nathan Ake. If he does get a move to a top 8 team at 3 million,
agree.
I mean, that's a ridiculous price, because he's got goals in him as well. So he's somebody, if he does get the move, because there was talk of him going to Chelsea, but I don't know whether that's called now. But could be a stonking player at that price. But again, wait and see. I think I wouldn't start with him.
Well, we've managed to pull out some gems quite quickly there, gents. We normally kind of climax towards that, but we've pulled some out already. This is why the data is so important. I've got a massive list I'll go through later of other players that I'm quite excited about, but this is why the data is brilliant.
Yeah, I just spotted one other name that I want to sort of like mention, but I don't know if he's injured or his current status. Allen of Everton, who's also on that last list, and his tackling is phenomenal, and he's like 2.8.
Yeah,
and he's a class player, but injury, whether he's like injury prone or whether it's a longer term injury and he's going to come back from it. But if he ever comes back, he'll be a darling to have.
Fantastic, thanks guys. And that, like I say, that's just looking at some of the data for last season. We've already picked a very cheap 11 there of players I think will all score really well, and we're only half an hour in. Fantastic stuff. We've already mentioned, but the introduction of bonus points last season for me was fantastic. It really did open doors, and we've got the impact of the bonus points. I mean, I'll just run through a few of the ones for keepers. In terms of saves, Meslier made 148 saves, the most, got 65 save points, 65 extra points, which he wouldn't have got the year before. Is crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Schmeichel and De Gea, who I had for a period last year, made 131 each, got 56 and 55 points respectively. Pope made 123, Sarr made 121, 50 odd points, absolutely crazy. And I know Ramsdale was making quite a lot, but then they started. He kind of went off form, didn't he, on the second half of the season? But excuse me, I think the introduction of that is great because it really widens the pool, and the same for the bonus points in terms of midfielders. So tackles, these are Norgaard's I mentioned, 109 tackles, 46 extra points from tackles alone. John McGinn from Villa made 105 tackles, 45 points. Stuart Dallas made 100 tackles, 40 points. And then, as we mentioned, Alan Decore, Højbjerg, Bissouma, Tielemans, Rodri, Moutinho, kind of all around that place goal, got 30 odd extra points each there. Can I ask you first, Luke, what were your thoughts on the changes, and how is it kind of helping you shape your team? Is it having a massive impact on the shape of your team now this season?
I think in previous seasons I would maybe have one budget midfielder. I think what it's done now, I mean, I love that change because it brings it is one of the Sky Games benefits that I think is great. And I think it's brought it to the TFF. I think it's improved the game. But I think what it does is give you more options for those midfield players, and therefore you can get a really good defense, which I think is the key in this game. and you can then justify maybe even 2 or 3 of the really big players, because you've got those kind of, I don't know, 40 points per million in the bank sort of players in your defence at a low thing. So you can get a Salah or a Son or a KDB at the right times. So I think it's made it a much better game. It also means there's more players that you can pick from. There's not just that one. I guess Gallagher last year. I mean, still don't know how Carl picked him out from last season, but fair play. We're all trying to do it, but the data's all there for that. Gallagher.
What a pick that was, Carl. By the way,
no data as well for him, really.
Unreal.
But I think that's the thing is now you've probably got 2.5 to 3 million, and if you get the right 2 or 3 of them, you're going to be flying.
Yeah, I agree.
So it just means you're not going to have as big a template. I mean, we'll come on to that. I'm sure we've probably got some players that are the same, but it's good. I just think it gives you more options.
Superb. And how about you, Carl?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I really do love the changes themselves. It brings other players in, and it gives more variety. One thing that I'll sort of like, when you look at it, sometimes some of the players haven't, in my view, maybe their prices should be inflated to reflect the bonuses they get.
Yeah.
So just looking at Norgard, he's top of the shop. He's 3.2. Right, he scored 46 points from tackles, right, for the season. That is like, what's that? 1 point. How many points is that? Like 1.4 points per game.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So he gets 2 points for playing, 1.4. So he's already like over 1 point per million per game, which is like huge value.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, he, assuming that tackles are pretty consistent between seasons, and I see no reason why they're not, there is huge value on the budget players that you can sort of pick from this tackle list. So it'd been a bit more interesting if they'd inflated the prices a bit more. John McGinn, I didn't realise he'd played 36 games. And crikey, I know he's a little bit more expensive at 3.6, but he does score the odd goal.
Yeah, he does. The odd screamer as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. Mind you, he picks up a few bookings, but there's some real gems in there.
I think looking at those first 2 as well, the thing which is exciting about them both, I mean, if you look at people like, I suppose, Allen and maybe Højbjerg, etc., they don't really get forward very often, but Norgard and McGinn actually get forward and get some attacker returns as well. But just to put that into context of the tackle points for Norgard and McGinn. So for Norgard, a 3.2 million midfielder, in old money, that would have been worth 9 extra goals. 9 extra goals. 9 5s are 45. In terms of points. That's how much of kind of a no-brainer these sorts of players are when we can pick out these gems. So I can see, anyone listening to this pod or anyone who kind of, looks at data themselves, I think Christian Norgard will be an incredibly popular pick. And, the casual managers who don't really look at this stuff will be thinking, why is Norgard's ownership like 20% or wherever it's going to be? But, some really interesting stuff there, Carl. And like I say, this is the data which really draws out those winning tips for how to do well in your leagues. Luke, in terms of midfielders, what are your thoughts there? And which ones, I suppose, are, in terms of your team, have you got your eye on 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 in particular?
So Ramsey at Villa played roughly half a season and got over 100 points. So he's got goals and he's got tackles, and he's 3.2. So yeah, he's just been straight in from day one. There's also Johnson at Forest, who I don't know enough about him, but he's 2.5, and a lot of well-informed people who've done a lot of research and have looked at him from the Championship have got him in, and at 2.5. So I've got those are the two that have almost been just ever presence in my team since day one. And then so those are the two. I think you guys have done quite a good number on Norgard. Actually, I might swap Bruno from Newcastle out and bring Norgard in as my third and free up a bit of cash. But I also think he's going to kick on. So I don't know. I mean, there's a point on Newcastle. I'd like to come on to them at some point, but I think Newcastle could do very, very well, and I think a lot of their players are underpriced if they do. But there's a lot of Newcastle players. I think you could almost pick a Newcastle value 11. But yeah, that's a side point. But yeah, so Ramsey and Johnson are the ones that I've had as ever presence. But I think you've done it. Yeah, you've probably sold Norgard to me as that third one potentially now.
Yeah, we'll touch on Johnson in a bit when we come to our kind of picks that the data is not helping us pick. But just a bit more on Jacob Ramsey. He played 34 matches last season, scored 6 goals and got an assist, and he got 66 tackles. So he's it backs up your thing there, Luke. He looks good.
A lot of those games, first half of the season, were coming on as sub.
They were. You're right.
5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It was only really just before Christmas that he broke into the team.
Agreed.
So, yeah,
he looks a good one. Can see midfield's packed with Jacob Ramsey and Cristiano.
I mean, my midfield. I mean, you fancy football. Yeah, Johnson, Ramsey, Norgard. Yeah. Might bring Basuma in there. What a quality 4 that is.
Yeah. So those who listen to this pod, and watch it on YouTube regularly will know that we are massive advocates of big at the back, as the data tells us. But we show this slide every time. In terms of looking at the data to help us decide where to spend our cash. It never really changes, Carl, in terms of what the trends tell us. Do you just want to give us a very brief overview of what this means and where we should be spending our cash?
Sure. So the next chart after the ones we just sort of mentioned, I basically just sort of plot how many points per game each player gets based on their value. And then I draw like a best line of fit between them, and I label some of them. Of course, some people will be above the line and some people below the line. But if you just look at the lines in isolation and sort of said, "Oh, this is how I'm going to," without any other knowledge, allocate my money, it's in the bottom right hand corner. You've got your 4 lines for each of the position, excluding the goalkeepers one. The red one is the defenders, and that's near enough the highest out of the outfielder players. So that sort of suggests that you should buy as many players as you can from that position, which is 5. And it's also the steepest. So the steepness says where you should be spending your money. So it sort of says it's better to put extra money into your defence that is there. So you should think about more expensive defenders are better. In terms of your strikers and your midfielders, there's not a huge difference between them. But what you do notice is the steepness. The midfielders is higher, so maybe you should go for 4 midfielders on the whole. But the steepness is less. So it's sort of saying you should probably put your money into your forwards before you put your money into your midfielders, which sort of like goes back, which is based in the narrative we was talking before about the cheap enablers at 2.6 million, 3 million. It says, keep your money cheap for your midfielders. And if you still got money after you bought your defenders, make sure you put it into your strikers. Yeah. So basically 5-4-1, 5-3-2, expensive defenders on the whole. This isn't a rule you have to follow, because if you find a dead cheap defender, like Luke mentioned with Ake, then obviously he's completely mispriced. And you put him in at and therefore you free up more cash later on. So it's not saying this is you have to follow. It's a good guidance if you're stuck. But if you find the gem, get that gem in there and then carry on the same sort of rules.
Lovely job. Leading on from this, the optimal teams from last year is one of my favourite slides and data points before we start to, kind of look at this season now. But you just want to run us through the optimal team from last year? 5-4-1, unsurprisingly, would have won it.
Well, it wouldn't have won it. It come close. The optimal team here
with no transfers made.
Because there's no transfers, would have been 100 points or so behind the winner. I think it had 2228 or whatever. Anyway, yeah, it's 5-4-1, and hey, most of the players aren't a surprise. Alisson, VVD, TAA, Matip, Cancelo in defence, with Guy of Crystal Palace, who scored a few goals late in the season, which probably gave him a good run. And then in midfield, you had Salah, Son, Bowen, Gallagher, and Jota up front. Hey,
Interesting there about Bowen and Jota. I don't know if you remember, Luke, but I think it was in our November pod when I shouted out, I think Bowen and Jota going to go on a run, and you were like, oh, I'm not so sure about that, Fergie. And yeah, I think you still owe me a pint for that. I'm not sure.
Probably that right? For laughing so much about the Harry Kane.
You do, you swine. You do.
But then, hey, you won Sun Dream Team, so I think you owe me a few more pints if we're going to go down that route.
Fair enough. Fair point, well made. Apologies, Carl. Stopped you in full flow there.
Yeah, no, that's right. Anyway, so that's a good team. That's just, so I've done the optimal team with last year's points. So again, when the people who've been reclassified, I've adjusted their bonus points. So using last year's points, this year's prices, very similar makeup actually. Alisson, Van Dijk, Cancelo, TAA, Guy, and Mitchell of Palace sneaks in there. Bowen, Ward-Prowse, Gallagher, Norgard, as we've talked about, and Son as your lone striker. That would score you, if they replicate those points, 1,972. So what I've done is, again, that looks a very good team, but Gallagher isn't no longer going to be a Palace darling, and he's stayed at Chelsea, or probably will be stayed at Chelsea. So I've taken him out, and I've created another optimal team without Gallagher. Surprise, not much change. Alisson, VVD, Cancelo, Robinson, Guy, Mitchell, Bowen, Mount, Norgard, McGinn.
Wow,
Son.
McGinn. Who would have thought that John McGinn would have been in the team of the season for TFF? I wouldn't have even thought that 10 minutes ago. That is unbelievable.
Even though I mentioned him, you just ignored it.
Well, all right, 15 minutes ago then. I know you mentioned him. I know you mentioned him earlier. Okay, just before we started, if you'd have said John McGinn, I would have gone, you what? But that's incredible.
Yeah, but you notice a lot of the players are the same. There's only a few different.
Of course.
Actually, between even using last year's prices, most of the places stayed the same. And when you take out Gallagher and you mix the players, you're only 5 points worse off at 1967. So you can change a little bit and still get very similar teams. But it's quite interesting that Mitchell gets in there as well. So that's 2 Palace players, even though Luke said he wouldn't touch Guy for some reason.
No, I said
Hang
that.
on, that was not me. He's in both
that.
my teams.
Oh, was that? Yeah, of course.
I said.
Your team. So
I
Tarnish me with that brush.
Yeah,
Come on, Carl.
Sorry.
Yeah, 5-4-1. A very familiar looking sort of template in terms of points. In terms of price structure. There, few premium defenders, 1 or 2 of the cheap ones, 1 or 2 premium mids, 1 or 2 of the cheap ones, and a premium forward. This 5-4-1 seems to be the one, right? It's just so hard. Like, how can you not start this season with like Salah, Haaland, Kane? It's it'd be interesting when we get onto that in a little bit. Luke, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think I'd back up everything Carl's just said, to be honest. I'm on board with that.
Nothing to add. Superb.
Nothing to add. Lost for words for once.
Lost for once. Yeah, indeed. Okay. Promoted teams. Now, normally for the promoted teams, it's not really something which I get too excited about. But I think for these 3 teams, in all 3 actually, Fulham, Bournemouth and Forest, I think there are players that will definitely find their way into our teams for one reason or another. Some of them are just ridiculously cheap, too cheap. Some of them have got good bonus potential. Some of them are really good players, and one of them, I think you might have mentioned earlier, Luke, is out of position and ridiculously cheap in Brennan Johnson for Forest. But have you had any initial thoughts, Luke, about the promoted teams? Any of the players at all?
Yeah, there's two for Forest that start. Well, there's three players actually. So there's Wilson, what a legend, great name. But he's 3 mil, so I think he's one to watch rather than bringing, because I think there's other players at the same price. But yeah, Johnson at 2.5 is 20. I'll just check the ownership. He's over 20% owned. I think from memory.
I think he's about 25.
Yeah. And then I think it's Williams, isn't it? He's just gone to Forest on loan. So he's 2.5 as well. So I think those are there. I'm trying to remember the guy. Somebody's gone to Fulham as well. I'm trying to remember
Andreas
who it is.
Pereira.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I can't remember what price he is, but he's probably another one to watch.
He's 2.7 million.
Yeah, so those are the ones that I think if I wanted those sub 3 million, but I think there's so many options around the 3 mil that I don't really want to take the risk. I'd rather take a Gahey or a Zinchenko at slightly higher, and then if I need the budget later on and they're there, I think I'd rather do that. But I will be 2.5 and 24-25% ownership. I think it's probably too big a risk, because if he kicks on, he's the one for me. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with the promoted teams.
Good stuff. And what about you, Carl? Thank you so much as usual for putting together all the data. What is your thinking on these players?
Yeah, so normally I don't have much opportunity to look into promoted teams, but on the slide here, what I've done is I looked at, is it FBref.com, and I went through all the matches from the promoted teams and marked down who's played, how many shots they had, and how many goals they sort of scored in a match. And I produced a table here, and I've just fit it in one slide. I've only done it for players who played a minimum of 3,000 minutes, because they were the main players. There's a few wraiths and strays below that which may be of interest. Some key data points that I sort of take out was Dominic Solanke. He took 5 penalties last year for Bournemouth, and the only penalty taker. Mitrovic took 7, again the only penalty taker. For Forest, you had Lee Taylor taking the first, then Lewis Graban took 2 penalties, and then Brendan Johnson took the last 4. So those were quite interesting. And then, so what I've done is I've ordered them on the percentage, what I would say the percentage chance of them scoring the goal if a team scored it. So Mitrovic, 41% and 10% chance of getting an assist if there's a goal, based on last year's data and a bit of dodgy math. Solanke, he comes next, 37 and 14. Brendan Johnson that you mentioned, 22 and 20. So those are the players that I'll sort of pick out. And the name is 4th on the list, and is Phil Billings. So I don't know if you remember him from his Huddersfield days. Then he went to Bournemouth. Now, I was surprised, but I wasn't overly surprised. But it's a bit of a surprise to see him in the list. And he's somebody who interests me. Though I did hear on a different podcast that I think they said that he played much more as a number 10 or like just behind the striker last year, and that he may be changing position. So even though he done well in terms of scoring goals last year, his position may change a bit, but he could be someone of interest. I thought when I looked at things previously, James Gardner looked interesting, but I think he's gone back to Man United, so you don't know what's going to happen with him. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in the top 4 that we mentioned. Good, probably going to be cheap and good goal involvement.
With Billing, you mentioned, he got 10 goals and 10 assists in the league last season. That is really good going, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think he's the is he the one who's incredibly tall? And I think he's like 6'6" or something along those lines.
Yeah, he looks like a beast of a man,
He does.
huge, huge. But like I sort of said, I think on the podcast they talked about him being in a more advanced because I used to think of him much more as a central midfielder, more defensive.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Was my impression. But by all accounts, by this other podcast last year, he played much more further advanced.
Yeah.
And near enough as not a striker, but like a advanced number 10.
Yeah.
And that may be changing because obviously all these teams, they bought players and have invested. So his role may change a little bit next year. Another player next day, Jaden Anthony, he had quite nice figures. Because I pulled this together a little bit because I play fan team as well, he only lasted 40% of the 90 minutes. So you'd have to delve into his data a bit more because he's either subbed off late on quite often or his minutes are quite curtailed and therefore maybe less attractive.
Yeah. Mitrovic, 4.3 million in TFF, 43 goals last season and 7 assists, 50 attacking returns. He's younger than we think, I haven't got his age in front of me, but I've always thought, because he's been around for so long, I would have guessed he's like pushing 30, but I'm sure he's still only about like 27 or something like that. But
yeah.
Do you think he can do it this year?
Well, that's why I look at the percentages more than the total goals, because when you got like teams in the championship, they often run away and score loads. So it's not the volume that he may have scored, but it's the percentage. So he scored 45% of all goals when he was on the pitch. And so even I think Fulham will score a few goals, and I think that if he continues, he will still have decent returns for his price.
Yeah, he's probably 10 goals a season, isn't he? That's sort of 10 to 12 range is where I'd probably see him ending up with a few assists. So it's pretty good. He's just priced slightly too. I mean, that's the thing with Diaz at Liverpool. If he's got Mane's place, which I think he's got, then like he's only 0.5 million more ish. Like I'd much rather have the Liverpool attacker than I'd take the Fulham attacker. But again, he is really good value, and if you are really constrained by budget, then it's a good move.
Solanke is 4 million, 29 goals last season, 7 assists. Next on the list, Brennan Johnson got 18 goals and 10 assists. He's on pens for Forest. He plays as a forward, but in this game, he's a 2.5 million midfielder, which sounds insane. So he is right in my basket. Phil Billing, as we've mentioned, looks really good value. I haven't got the price on Billing. I will have a look, but I think he's I want to say he's about 3 million. Let's have a look. Yeah, he's 3 million Billing, so a bit more expensive than Johnson and Pereira. But for if he's getting the tackles, some goals and a few assists, he could be really good value there. Wilson, as we mentioned, Harry Wilson. Where's he gone? Sorry, I clicked a button then, and I should have clicked the button. 10 goals, 19 assists. Has been joined by Andres Pereira at Fulham, as we know. Wilson is 3 million as well. Ryan Yates for 1, so he's injured for the start of the season, but he's only 2.2 million. He's that kind of player, like that sort of Jacob Ramsey last year. You know that player, you just stick him in because he's just so incredibly cheap. So I think when Ryan Yates is back, I think he could be one because he's a 90-minute man when he plays. I think he played the vast majority, if not all, of Forest games last season. So they're the ones I'm kind of interested in. And I think there's quite a few there actually. Lots of goals, lots of assists, lots of tackles, but it's how cheap they are, which is incredible. I suppose the balance is whether you want to pay just for example, if you're balancing up Norgard at 3.2 million, do you want to have the 0.7 saving for someone like Brennan Johnson at 2.5 million out of position forward? I think that's a tough one. Or whether are they two that are kind of nailed in your team. This is obviously if you're going for premium defenders and attackers as well. But thanks for doing that, Carl. Some really interesting choices in there. And I think we mentioned it at the start, but it's worth sort of reiterating again. The player pool for this season looks massive. Like we've still not got onto the part of the podcast where we look at other players we like other than the data. We've already identified probably 30 or more players who we think could all prove really good value over the season. So thank you for doing that, Carl. That is absolutely superb. We've now got the fixtures up for the first part. I've got the 10 games of next year. Interestingly, Man City are top of the ticker. Brentford are second, Leeds third, Arsenal fourth, Liverpool fifth. So a few of the bigger teams up there for having really good early fixtures. Down the bottom, Wolves, even though they start off really well, from game week 7 to 10, they go Liverpool, City, and then Chelsea. But Wolves do start off well. United start off okay, and then it gets a bit grimmer. Palace and Fulham down the bottom too. But it's funny. I think with Telegraph early in the season, probably the only game where I don't, and I think you mentioned this previously, Carl, as well. I don't think fixtures potentially for me play a massive part in my game week 1 team in Telegraph. Have I misquoted you there, Carl?
I'm not sure if it's a quote that I've ever said, but it's something I definitely agree with.
Okay.
Because fixtures don't matter as much. You don't because you don't have a captain.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not jumping to try to get the best captains. It's all. I think Luke sort of talked about it. It's much more focused on the value of your team and longer term, and to save transfers as much as possible until the later part. So everybody plays each other twice, but you're not trying to gain for little short gains.
Exactly.
Your transfers should be much more strategic, longer term, and therefore short term fixtures aren't the be all and end all.
Yeah, I agree. What are your take on fixtures, Luke, for the opening sort of part of the season? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute again. So the fixtures are so heavily skewed for those first 10 games to City and Liverpool. My view was get as many of them in as I possibly could, basically, within budget. Wolves are the other one that really stood out to me, but Wolves' form at the end of the season just dropped off a cliff.
They were awful,
and I'm just so I'd love to stick a couple of Wolves players in based on their season, but that end of the season was just so bad, and if they carry that form into the start of the season, the fixtures are going to be irrelevant. So they need to start turning up, and then they might be interesting. But I think, I'm sort of, but really, I'm not seeing past City and Liverpool. Arsenal have got an all right start as well, as of Spurs from memory, but not in the same league. And if it's a Kane versus Salah, well, it's Salah every time because the fixtures are better.
Yeah, I think in terms of the fixtures, for me, I agree with you, Luke. Man City and Liverpool. They're incredibly exciting, and this is why straight away, if you think of those teams and the players, like you think of Man City, for me, from a fantasy view, you straight away, for me anyway, think of Cancelo, probably Haaland, maybe Laporte, and when you think of Liverpool, straight away you think of Salah, and then maybe Trent, Robertson, Alisson, Diaz, as you've mentioned. I'm probably not as convinced on him as you are. I still think he's a wonderful player, but I'm not sure how the dynamic between the three is going to work. I think Jota's out for a while, isn't he? So I expect the front three will probably be Diaz, Nunez, and Salah. And while they're all great players individually, we're yet to see them play forwards as a three. But they have got the fixtures right. Away to Fulham first, home to Palace will be a stiffer test, Carl. It's probably fair to say.
I expect so.
And then United, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Everton. So yeah, I'm not. It's going to be interesting because I kind of touched on it earlier, but that Salah, Mane, Firmino has been there for quite a while now. It's like 3 or 4 seasons, and we know we knew what we were getting, but now with a new dynamic, because Salah historically normally scores better without Mane. But he won't have played before with Diaz and Nunez. So it's going to be interesting to see how it kind of plays out. And obviously City, don't play with a striker, and they're going to have to adapt their system to accommodate one of the most lethal finishes in world football. So I think Man City and Liverpool, for me, I completely agree with you. I think we should be trying to get in, say, as many as we can. You obviously have to be selective, especially with rotation at City. I think the only part of the fixtures which is impacted on my decision making for my game week 1 team, I think, is I don't think I'm going to have a Spurs forward. Just because I think I definitely want Haaland and Salah for the reasons we've said already, personally. But to have Haaland, Salah, and Kane or Son is just crazy. I mean, you can't afford it, especially if you go for the cheap mids. But it just sounds crazy, especially when we know all the value is in defence. So it's,
I was going to say you should click record, because my main team, I don't have Haaland or Salah.
You don't have Haaland or Salah in your team.
Salah.
Now listen. Now, do you remember what Carl did last year? Didn't start off with Salah. Do you remember that? Poor old Carl. And you're not going to start off with Haaland or Salah. Flipping heck, Luke. I reckon we'll talk you around by the time we get to the end of the pod.
Yeah. No.
We'll see. I think you can afford them is the thing. I think you can actually afford them because of these, because of John McGinn and Phil Billing and everyone else. But fixture wise, I don't think it massively impacts game week 1. Obviously, in terms of our strategy for the season, and like I say, kind of seasoned listeners and watchers will know this, but in terms of how to play the game, we advocate not using many transfers at all in the first half of the season. I think last year, actually, I got down to, I think it was 28 transfers by New Year's Day. So I'd only used 12, and I was in a great position. And I actually kind of got a bit overexcited in January. I think I used about 13 transfers in January. Yes. So, But yeah, the game week 1 team should be set up with longevity in mind. And as Luke's already said, I think he thinks he's going to use 2 or 3 by mid-November, which is probably a bit ambitious.
I don't think I'll do that, but the aim, the aim is there.
Yeah. But structurally, for new listeners and watchers, new people to the Telegraph, we should be looking at setting up a game week 1 team, probably kind of regardless of the fixtures, just to get a rock solid foundation in place for when we attack the second half of the season, when Telegraph as a whole and mini leagues are won and lost. You don't get anything for being top of your league at Christmas, unless you're in a league which gives away a prize for being top of Christmas. But the main aim in terms of having a good overall rank, and winning your mini leagues is to hold back the transfers, to build a rock solid team that you're probably not going to change from very much for the first half of the season. This is why we only do a podcast every sort of 3 months, because if we did one every week or even every month, it would be save your transfers. That would be the advice, which is why we only do them every couple of months. So it's probably just worth getting that in, because we haven't really mentioned it yet. In terms of players, then, so this is the part I'm most excited about. So we've touched on the players in terms of the data points, what the data tells us. We've pulled out some really, really good players. Thank you so much, Carl, for pulling all that out for us. But in terms of other players we haven't mentioned yet, for whatever reason, Carl, can I come to you first? Let's go down sort of position by position, regardless of data, regardless of anything. Now, who are the goalkeepers for Telegraph? If you could name, 2 or 3 who you are considering for your game week 1 team.
Alisson from Liverpool.
Yeah.
Lots of clean sheets, and if I recall correctly, he makes quite a few saves. But from the chart, not as many as I expected. Pope of Newcastle would be one, because of what they mentioned before about Newcastle being underpriced, and he makes lots of saves and a good goalkeeper anyway. Those would be the 2 that jumps out. I'm not a big fan of. I've gone off to Arsenal. De Gea, I think, could be useful it depends on how you think Man United would be. He makes quite a lot of saves, if I recall correctly. Well, let's try and just sort of think going through the teams, and that'd be it. I remember seeing Gaeta of Palace in one of my stats earlier, and based on price, and Palace, do keep a few clean sheets, but I'm not even sure if he'd be first team for the whole season.
Yeah.
So
you've signed a new keeper. I've seen a lot of chat that he's going to lose his place.
Yeah, but the new keeper hasn't played in any friendly match, either home or abroad yet, which is odd.
Okay. Luke, who are the 2 or 3 keepers you've got your eye on?
I've got 2.
Okay.
And it's either Alisson or Pope.
Okay.
One of those, but I'm not considering any other keeper.
I did look at so I'm I think I'm on Alisson, but I did look at Sarr, 3.3 million for Wolves. I know Wolves finished awfully, but Sarr did make the 5th highest amount of saves last year, 121 saves.
Hate him.
But it'd be purely a price thing, right? And the other, which I'm not really interested in, but Dean Henderson for Forest, 2.8 million, is probably another one. I think he was priced as the Man United reserve keeper who has since moved to Forest.
I think I'm not sure if it's in one of the readers' questions or I saw it or somewhere else. The Southampton goalkeeper that they signed, whether he becomes the first choice.
Okay, on to defenders, and Luke, you get first pick. I've got a massive list of defenders. You go first.
Right. So, in terms of so
who you're interested in defenders? It can be anyone.
Well, it's Liverpool, Man City. So Trent and VVD are in. Cancelo is in. Those 3 are absolutely locked. And then it's just a question of that the 4th premium defender. This is ridiculous because I will have 4. So it's, do I go Laporte? Do I go James? Do I go Chilwell? Or do I go Robbo? But it will be one of those 4.
God, blimey.
And then it will be either Gahey or Zinchenko for the budget one. I am just toying at the moment to actually go 5 premiums at the back and then just get 2 of that last 4 list. So it might be Robbo, Laporte, James or Chilwell if I can juggle my team a little bit. I'm just trying to do that right now in the background. But so yeah, it's just Liverpool and Man City really, and then maybe a Chelsea defender, like one of their fullbacks.
Easy as that. Job done. Anything to add, Carl, from the defensive list?
Yeah.
Not really. Liverpool and Man City are the main ones. TAA, Robson, Van Dijk, Cancelo would be the obvious ones. There's some interest, I think, on the Spurs wide players, but they're not really on my list. Doherty, I think, would be, because it's a bit more unknown, but they're cheaper. Yeah. But I'm spending all my money in defence anyway, so I don't need to go cheap.
Yeah, this is it.
But you could make a case that they could offer value and as many points as Liverpool, Man City. Yeah. I think you've got to smoke a bit of dope to make that case, but nevertheless, that is feasible. But nobody else. If you needed to save a bit of money, then I'd have dipped my toe into the Palace, because I think Gahey and Mitchell are cheap and they look like they're a solid-ish team for that price. But for that, I would wait a couple of months because their opening fixture is horrendous. So I wouldn't want any Palace defenders or players to start the season.
Okay, for those who are looking for a few cheaper ones potentially, Matip is 4.4. Obviously finished the season incredibly well. Looks to be number 1. He did have a bit of a horrible injury record, but he managed to last out the season last year. So I think, assuming he's number 1 again, he's a good million saving over the rest of the Liverpool defenders. You touched on Spurs defence. I think the Spurs defence offers really good value. I'm tempted to chuck in a second or third team and go for a Spurs defensive block, which means I can have basically who I want for the rest of the team. But Perisic, you've mentioned. I'm not sure he's going to start the season, but he's incredibly attacking. Left wing back, he's going to be. But as I say, we're not sure if he's going to start the season. 3.8 million. He was in my draft straight away when the game opened. But I know he hasn't been playing much in pre-season. Doherty, as I mentioned, 3.4. If I get any whiff that Doherty is going to start the season, I think he's going in my team because he's just an animal. I really do think he is. And Conte's comments on Jed Spence are that he's not his size. The club signing his season was one for the future, which is interesting because Spence looked a really good player as well.
So just a point which we haven't actually talked about. So it's not a game change; it's a football change. So the move to 5 subs.
Yeah.
Right. And I can't remember what podcast I heard this on, but I've heard this on a podcast for one of the other games. But if you've got defenders who are going to play, it's got the potential of them coming off early. And I've got to remind myself in Telegraph whether the clean sheet gets wiped out. But I think if they come off early, they lock it in, don't they? So you may...
They get a pass clean sheet in Telegraph.
Yeah, so you may find like somebody like Robbo, because Shimikas is quite a good understudy and he did come on a little bit for sort of 15, 20 minutes. That actually may benefit certain players like Perisic. One of the reasons I'm not going anywhere near him is because he always got subbed in Italy, right, near the end of the games. But actually that could play into his hands because if they keep the clean sheet and then lose it once he's off the pitch, happy days. That's almost the perfect scenario with players like that. So I think there may be some players that you may want to look at that actually if a team can keep it to a clean sheet for 60, 70 minutes and you know they're likely to come off, that's probably more of a positive than playing the 90 and potentially losing out on the attacking return. That was a point that really resonated with me. And I think it's one we haven't really discussed, but because of the 5 subs, I mean, there's other players, and we haven't gone on to it, but like Phil Foden, who I know you love, but I hate owning him, he's going to get subbed more. Like he'll play more games, but he'll probably play less minutes per game. And, you know, I'm not quite sure what impact that's going to have. So I'm sort of still trying to steer sort of realistically to those players that are almost going to be nailed on for the 90 every game they play. So that's something I guess people should consider as well. I wouldn't give it too much consideration, but it will definitely have an impact. I don't think anybody knows what level of impact that will have.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And just to clarify the rules, there is a 60-minute rule as well. So normally, if someone comes off on like the 57th minute, so anything under 60, and the team keeps a clean sheet, they still have to keep the team still have to keep a clean sheet for the entire match. They would get 4 points, so that is 2 for the part clean sheet, 2 for the appearance. To get the full 7 points, they have to play over 60, and their team has to not concede. So even if a player comes off early, it's different to FPL. So even if if Reece James comes off in the 68th minute, and then Chelsea concedes in the 89th minute, he wouldn't get any clean sheet points even though he came off. So that's just worth clarifying there. But yeah, thanks for that, Luke. I think that's a really good point about the subs, and this is why players like Perisic, for example, who he's a little bit older, he gets brought off a lot. Is he worth the risk? So yeah, it's a good point. Just keeping on the Spurs trend, I think Dyer at 3.2 and Romero at 3.6. I just think they're just really cheap. I mean, Dyer and Romero are absolutely nailed. They're nailed for a top 4 team. I think they'll be top 4. So I think they're incredibly cheap. Going a bit further down the list, if Man City sign Cucurella from Brighton and he starts playing regularly, 3.4 million is ridiculously cheap for a Man City fullback, as we know. We've already mentioned Zinchenko at 3.2, Trippier at Newcastle 3.3. I think looks good value. Set pieces as well as obviously clean sheets. Tomiyasu at Arsenal, 3.2 million. So he missed most of the second half of last season, but he looked very, very good when he played for them. Probably think there are better options at that price point, like Zinchenko, like Dyer. for example. But 3.2, he's an interesting one there. The cheap one I've seen, I don't think he'll play, but if William Saliba plays for Arsenal, he's back off loan. If he does start playing regularly for Arsenal, he's 2.5 million. So if you are looking for a bargain basement defender, he could be the one there. So there's just a few other ones I've picked out there, but I'm quite sweet on the Spurs boys. Cucurella, if he goes to Man City, and Zinchenko, I think they're the ones which I'm kind of interested in. Obviously, people like Robertson and Trent, we take for granted, right? Because they're going to be in the vast majority of teams. Let's have a look at midfielders. Carl, come to you first. In terms of, let's go for top 3 or 4 who you're really, really interested in.
Well, there's 2 ways of answering it. There's ones that I'm interested to actually select.
Yeah.
And it'll be, we talked about them, Billing, Norgard and Brendan Johnson are my 3.
Love it.
But there's others down in that basement, Alan, that I mentioned, Basumo. If I think they're sort of ready and they're starting, that's where I want the. I'm just going cheapest chips there. But it doesn't mean that, if I had unlimited budget, naturally I would think De Bruyne, Bowen.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's sort of that. And Bruno from Newcastle. And of course, then you got your Man United crew, maybe, and Mount. But those are my 3.
They're your 3. So Billing, Norgard, and Brennan Johnson.
Yeah.
They're your 3. Yeah. I did to add. Not the most exciting. Well, I say that, Carl. I mean, it's obviously not the most exciting. This is what this game is all about. It is, if you look at the combined ownership, I know that Johnson's ownership is really low, but I think Billings was I think it's like 0.3, and I haven't checked Norgard's, but incredibly cheap.
I'm very similar. I think there's a few. Yeah, there's 7, 8 of that sort of 2.8 to about 3.2 million mark midfielders, but yeah, Johnson, Norgard, Ramsey for me are probably the 3 with Bruno. The other one, so I have got a premium midfielder. I have a rule where I don't start with new players to the league. I never ever do it. Every time I do it, it backfires, right? I've got other games where I can risk it. I'll do it in the luck game of FPL, right? So fine, I'll have Haaland there. But I'm taking KDB because if Haaland goes off, KDB is going to set up tons of the goals and he's cheaper. And if he scored, he scored 4 near the end of last season.
And he gets tackle bonus as well, whereas Haaland doesn't.
Yeah, he's had a price drop.
Yeah.
So he's cheaper, can get tackles, more points for the goals. I've got KDB in one of my teams. So
I really like that pick. Because of the tackle bonus, because of the fact that I do think that City are going to have to change the way they play a little bit. I think it's going to suit KDB. How many times this season we're going to see, we're going to hear De Bruyne to Haaland, it's another goal. I think we're going to see it a lot.
And Haaland will get taken off and Foden will go up top it's KDB is the premium. I am interested. So as long as Ronaldo goes, I think Bruno Fernandes comes back into the mix.
Yeah, that's a good show.
Because he'll be straight back on pens. And if you think how good he was. So, and I think with the move of all of the midfielders to forwards, they're going to get less points because they're 1 point less for the goal.
Yeah.
And so I think, then suddenly Bruno and KDB could be very interesting picks. But I'm not going anywhere near Man United. Pre-season form is nothing, as much as all the Man United fans seem to think it's amazing, but it means absolutely nothing.
After we've gone through the midfields and forwards now, I do want to just have a short discussion on price points because I think this is a really important discussion to have while we're talking about KDB and Bruno. Just a few others I would add in there. Yeah, so on my list, I had De Bruyne on my list, Bruno, Norgard, Wilson, Pereira, and Johnson. We mentioned earlier from the promoted teams, a project billing as well. Bissouma from Spurs. I think if he plays at 3 million, I think he's going to be incredible value because tackling wise, he is probably pro-rated at Norgard sort of levels, but he also plays for a team that scores a few goals as well. I say when Yates is back for Forest, if we are looking for that player, that kind of 2 million or 2.2 million player, I think he could be, he could be good as well. I think we're quite dry on the attacking mids. I think like Bowen and that are just a bit expensive for me this season. 5 million. Who would you rather have, Robertson or Bowen? You'd go for Robertson all day long, wouldn't you? I think, but yeah. On to forwards. Luke, you get the first pick of forwards.
Just talked about my rule. So I don't own him, but Salah is the best player in the league. I don't care. Like, he's got the best fixtures for the first 8 games. He is the best player in the league, in my opinion, bar KDB. KDB's better, but doesn't get the output. So Salah would be number 1. Haaland obviously speaks for itself. I mean, he's new to the league. Man City, if you think about Jack Grealish, all these players that come into Man City, all these big signings for lots of money, they almost all struggle in the first season to adapt to the Man City way of playing. Haaland, I hope, doesn't, because I like him as a player, but who knows? And then Diaz and James for value, because I just think Diaz at 4.9 is just, I mean, he should be 5 and a bit benchmarked against the other players. It's just if he goes off, he's a cheat code. And then Dan James, if you did want to just chuck your money everywhere else, 3 million for a starting player for any team playing up front. We've talked about it before. The forwards are always overpriced in this game, in my opinion. They should be 1 million less, but Dan James is about the right price for the player that he is. So value for money, which this game is about value. So those are probably the 4 that I'm interested in. There are some other players that could come into it, but not to start. It will be one of those 4 will be my 1 slot.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Luke. Carl, who do you want to chuck in on that list?
Well, the list, to me, Haaland, Salah, Kane and Son would be the top 4 that I would think about. And if you're going premium, I'd pick from those. There's, you're always going to get your Vardy. He's going to have his little hot streak.
Yeah.
I'm surprised nobody mentioned Jesus. But he looks, I don't know, it's too much of an unknown, and he looks quite expensive at 6.1, considering they haven't got the same caliber or track record as what Spurs finished last year at. So that's a bit more of an unknown. I'll just go for those 4 main ones, and then if you would need a bit cheaper, go down. Leeds will be an interesting case this year. Talk about James, because they've sold Rafinha and Phillips, and how much will that take away from their attacking threat, considering how much they struggled last year? I understand they have bought people, so it may be okay, but they have had 2 top class players taken out from a team that struggled last year.
Lovely job, thank you, Carl. I think for Chelsea, Sterling at 6 is probably a bit much, especially when Havertz is 5.4. You would guess that Sterling and Havertz will probably score quite similarly. I would guess. I do think Havertz at 5.4. If he nails down that number 9 slot, will have a part to play this season. I noticed, Carl, just one of your things, that Callum Wilson. I think he's the opening fixture is really nice. Home to Forest, and then they've got a couple of difficult ones, haven't they? But I do think he'll come into the reckoning later. I do think he's a fabulous player. 5 million is probably a bit expensive for me for a sort of mid-table player. Go on.
Well, it depends if you think Newcastle are mid-table or not.
Well, good point.
I should have mentioned him, because I do like Wilson as a player, and his percentage of goals that he gets for the teams he plays for is really, really high, much higher than Salah and probably Haaland. But the issue with Wilson, unfortunately, he does spend a few weeks here and there on the treatment table.
I'll go on.
One more to watch.
Yeah.
So Brozier, but who was at Saints on loan from Chelsea. There's a lot of talk of him going to West Ham. Now I know they've got Antonio, but he's 3.4 mil.
Yeah.
Right. So if he locks down a starting place in West Ham, and again, it's a value game, that's just bonkers value. If he makes that move, but he's one to watch. He's not one to start with. Don't start with him. But if he does get that move, which I can't see him staying at Chelsea for the season, so he's going to go somewhere. But if he goes to a top half team and nails down a place, that price is again potential cheat code.
I agree with that. He was on my list as well. 4.8 million. Spurs for Kulusevski. He is a forward. I do think he's good. He will lose his tackle. He actually got quite a few bonus for tackles last year, but he looks good. Obviously, there's the Richarlison threat is a bit of a pain, but 4.8 million. If Richarlison or Son gets injured, for example, for a while, he could be a really, really cheap route into that Spurs front three. Ivan Toney, 4.6, probably a bit expensive. I think he'll have a good season, but I think he's a bit expensive. When you look at the other options around, Mitchell, you mentioned 4.3. Interesting one, Martial at 4.3. So if Ronaldo goes, so Martial has scored 3 and 3 in pre-season. I know it's pre-season before everyone says, but 4.3, you never know. Solanke, we've mentioned from Bournemouth, is 4 million. Probably going to avoid that one. And Nketiah is 4 million if Jesus gets injured, and Nketiah finished the season really well, scored a fair few goals. Umbomo, 3.8 million forward for Brentford, who plays most games, is not to be sniffed at, especially if you think, bro, you're at 3.4, Luke. Umbomo 3.8. I don't think it's a bad price. I'm not saying to jump on him, right? We're just looking at, if you find yourself with a 3.8 million hole up front, you don't know who to go for. These are sorts of players you could maybe go for. You mentioned Broja. Undav's Brighton's new signing Undav is supposed to be very. I don't know much about him. He's supposed to be very good at 3.2 million. But the one cheap player, I don't know if either of you have spotted him yet. But we should have a starting striker for a Premier League team at 2.3 million. Awoniyi has just signed for Forest, and all the talk is, I think he scored 15 goals last season in the Bundesliga. Looks a good player. I've read a few things about him, and they reckon he's going to play. So you could have a 2.3 million starting striker there for Nottingham Forest. So he's the one I kind of I know I can see Luke is writing furiously. He's very interested in the 2.3 million striker. So again, I'm not saying to jump on any of these players, but they're just a few options there if you're stuck at a certain price point.
Yeah, I mean, I said this last season. I think there's, for those who've not played TFF before, and I know from the Twitter chat, there's a lot of people that haven't. I think my strong advice is have as fewer forwards as you can get away with having, because there's more value further back in the team. But I know there's a lot of cheap midfielders, so you probably can get away with one or two big strikers. But I think the way they've priced it, every season I go on about this, like Richarlison at 5.2 million, it's basically the same price as Robertson, who almost got double the points in defence. Yeah. It's just spend 7 million or spend 3.5 or less. Ignore everyone else in the middle of that, unless there's a ridiculous 4-for-1 run with someone who's in form like Antonio was last season. I think it was 4.2 or something, and he went on a run. But I just don't like the way they price it. They're either too cheap, like 2.3 if he starts. It's too cheap.
Too cheap. Too damn cheap.
It is. No, for a start. I mean, if you work out, he doesn't even need to score 80 points, and his points per million is off the scale for 80 points for the season. Or you've got Salah at 240 points, and it's just you pick one end of the spectrum, and I think you just go with that. And just put your money where they're priced reasonably at the back in the midfield.
Just a bit more on Awoniyi. He was a Liverpool player. and he went off on loan. Played for Union Berlin last season, scored 15 goals in 31 appearances, and has just signed for Forest on a 5-year deal for 17 million. He's 24 years old, so 17 million is a lot of money, so he's probably going to play. So there's your starting striker. 2.3 million. Incredible.
Can I ask, because obviously you've done more research than me on this person, how does that impact on Brendan Johnson?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and the answer is I haven't done enough research, Carl, about that. is the answer. But I would guess it's one, maybe one or the other. But I believe from what I read, there is an article on Fantasy Football Hub which I haven't read fully yet, but they do say those are the first two picks. Are those two players in terms of the best FPL players, Brennan Johnson and Awoniyi, who was a Nigerian 24-year-old footballer. So, definitely one to watch there as a filler. Superb stuff. Let's have a quick look at the overall ownership so far. This is of this morning. Quite. I love the ownership. I always find it absolutely fascinating. The ownership. Top of the shop at the moment, Erling Haaland has come with a big reputation. He is owned by 44.89% of the game. Mohamed Salah 44%. Trent Alexander-Arnold 35%. Kevin De Bruyne is quite high, I think. This 31%. Cancelo 28%. Jared Bowen 28%, which I think is very high. They're probably going off last season's points. I think that's a bit too high. Brennan Johnson. So everyone's in the know in regard to Brennan Johnson. He's in 25% of teams. Harry Kane 23%. Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle 22%. Gabriel Jesus 21%. Son 21%. Gahey 21%. Jeez. It's going off last season's points, obviously. Mason Mount 19%. Alisson 19%. And then Robertson, Van Dijk. Perisic, Trippier, Saka and Edison are all around 16%. Interestingly, normally when we look at these ownerships, they don't show a great look, a great team. But I actually think that if you look at what that team will look like roughly, with Haaland and Salah up front, or Salah and De Bruyne, Trent, Cancelo, Brennan Johnson is the cheapie, Bruno Guimaraes and either Son, Jesus or Kane. Gahey is the cheapie, Alisson and goal, and then Robertson. It's a bloody good team. And I suppose that just a point I want to make there is that this is another reason why I'm going for Haaland or Salah ahead of Kane or Son. Is because of the ownership. And I know, 138. Sorry guys, I had a bit of bloody toilet tissue up hanging from my nose. I'm gonna have to leave that in now, and I'm gonna leave that in. I'll leave it in. I can't be bothered to edit it out. It's all done. Yeah, that's a good team. So sorry, just to touch on the ownership. If you go against Haaland or Salah and they pop off in the first 2 or 3 games, you're behind half the game. So Luke,
but they're not captained.
I agree with that, but they are hat-trick material.
Yeah, but
Haaland's home to Bournemouth in game week 2. Salah's away to Fulham in game week 1.
Yeah, but you've got to, as well as not having the captain, I think when you look at the ownership of some of these people, it's the caliber of people who has that ownership.
That's fair.
And I think Haaland, people just want them. Yeah. Why is De Bruyne so popular? Because he's a big name, and there's a lot more people I think play this game casually, and you'll be wanting to keep up with maybe the more casual player. And if they go off, well, you're keeping pace with the casual people and not the top players. If they don't pop off, you may find yourself behind.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point, Carl.
That's what I say. But
any thoughts, either you guys, on the ownership? Does it matter to you in the slightest? Anything interesting or not in there?
There's a number of players there that I think Carl's point. There's a number of players in that ownership that just why would you have, with Spurs' fixtures and at 6.7, why would you not just pay 0.2 or 0.3 million more and have Haaland or Salah or both? I mean, Kane never scores in August. Now he's going to go and bang Gunny because I've said that. But, you know, what is it, 5 seasons in a row or something that he doesn't score in August? So, like, you know, it just, I can understand the top two, but Kane at 23%, Son at 21%, Jesus. I mean, at that price, it's just ridiculous. That's like FBL crew, I think, playing this game, because it's just stupid price for a player. Like for 0.7, 0.8 more million, you can get a much better player. You're just wasting your budget on a player like that. He's not going to get 30 goals for the season. Watch him bang 30 goals now, but whereas Haaland and Salah could. So that 0.7 million or whatever it is, 0.8 million, that can go so much further at the back. I mean, you can afford any defender who will guarantee you 200 points. Like, or you can have Jesus, who will get somewhere between 120 and 180. But I'd rather have guaranteed defender get me 200 points for the season. No transfers, thank you.
Fair enough. Good stuff, chaps. Thanks for that.
Can I sort of say one other thing? The ownership itself, I don't take a huge time looking at it, but what I find interesting is I do love a quick scan of the list, and all the names that we know I don't care about, but it's the names which will go, who's that person? So I know we've sort of talked about him, but Brendan Johnson, if I looked down that list, I'd have never heard about him if I hadn't done any research. And I go, oh, who's he? And oh yeah, there's Bruno. I forgot about Bruno. And then maybe Gay. And it's like, those are the 3 names which sort of would jump out at me if I didn't really give much consideration. And I'd think, why are they popular? All the others, yeah, of course they're popular. They're household names, but it'd be those 3. And then I'd try and do a bit more research. That's what I look at ownership for, is who I don't know rather than who I do like. That's
fair. Just to touch on some of the ownership of the other players, Christian Norgard, 7.2% owned. I think that's quite high, actually. Philip Billin, 0.3% owned. So he's your one there, Luke. Sorry, Carl. If he bangs a goal or 2 in, he's you're laughing there. Okay, we had a gazillion questions in. Thank you so much for everyone who sent them in on our various channels and platforms. We got them in off WhatsApp, we got them in off Twitter, got them in off email, we got them from everywhere. So I'm hoping we probably answered a lot of them, to be honest. So we'll whiz through them. You know, I don't think we're going to have time to just give in-depth answer to all of them, but if we can just give, you know, kind of quickish answers, it would be useful. Paul McNulty first, great TFF player, finished I think 41st last year, asks, with us now having a full season of tackle bonus in play, do you think defensive midfielders are priced accordingly, or are they too high or low based on value? Carl, do you think that Norgard et al. Are too high or low, or about right?
No, they're too low. I think some of the budget ones should be higher. But it's a little bit like Luke's point about the strikers. There's too many people that are priced really too low. If they go off these tackle bonuses, some players they don't have to do anything. They only have to turn up, make a couple of tackles, and go home. They're no brainer.
Cool. Stephen Troop again had a very, very good season last year. I think he was in the top 20. I'm not sure where he finished, but Stephen is a fabulous and very experienced player as well. Says, lovely, drafted my teams. Can't wait to tear some apart after. I guess first question is, and then Luke, I know you saw this one because I was laughing because I did the exact same thing. He says, how is WC affecting your transfer strategy? Now, with our FPL brains on, we both thought that meant wild card. So we were both frantically looking through the rules thinking, there's a wild card. And we both wasted about 10 minutes of our life, didn't we?
Because 20 minutes.
20 minutes of yours.
I read all the rules twice through going, what the hell have I missed here?
Brilliant. But he actually obviously meant World Cup. So so you've kind of said, I think, you know, how is the World Cup going to affect your strategy, if at all?
I am, yeah, literally. It worries me a little bit because it's quite the temperature's ridiculous that the players are going to be playing in. So I think I'm going to try and use even less transfers. So normally up until Christmas, I would advise an aim of no more than 10 to 12. This year, I'm aiming for no more than sort of 6 to 8 by the time we get to the World Cup, because I suspect at least 2 or 3 of my players are going to have to go because of rests or whatever from World Cup. So I don't know. I mean, I may be lucky and then I may have loads of extra transfers, which I may not maximize the use of. But again, this game, I mean, I think somebody else made a comment, which is pick a team, delete the app, come back in January.
Exactly.
There are worse ways of playing. And actually my second team, I pretty much did that. I made 3 transfers or 4 transfers in my second team, came back in January because they were doing terrible off the start, and they were only about 4 points behind my main team with about 6 more transfers. So there is a lot to be said with just pick a team, delete the app.
Indeed. Just so everyone knows, Carl was just on the phone. He was on the phone to Philip Billing, asking him which position he's going to be playing this season, when he's going to be playing defensive midfield
he's
or,
up front.
or attacking midfield. And he's actually said he's going to play up front.
He's actually up front and on pens.
Brilliant, superb. Aman Tatler, a very, very good fantasy manager. He says, with Henderson joining Forest, are they the new Sheffield United? Some blocks did well previously. And he also asks about whether it's worth to go big up front with Salah, Kane and Haaland. Carl, what are your thoughts on Forest defence? Or do you just think, look, just go with the big guns? What's your thinking?
I'm just going to mainly go with the big guns. I think Henderson could be okay because he's fairly cheap. A lot of it doesn't matter what he's done at Sheffield United. It's like how teams play. And, I don't know about Forest. I haven't delved into them. I thought they looked, in their cup games at home, they looked quite good. Yeah. So he could be a good option. But it's too much of an unknown. I wouldn't go there myself at this moment in time. But if somebody said they're doing it, I wouldn't sort of say it's mad.
Good stuff. And Salah, Kane and Haaland up front, is it too much?
Yes, in a short answer, because we've already sort of talked about it, and I know there's a lot of questions. The value is still in the back. So you could go for 2 up front. Yeah. I would probably say 1 up front, but, 1 major one.
Yeah.
But yeah, 3 is probably too much.
Daniel Moody.
Too much sacrifices. Sorry, too much sacrifice elsewhere.
Daniel Moody, TFF addict, on Twitter. He says, many of last season's stars have risen in price significantly. Ramsdale, Cancelo, Reece James, Bowen, Saka, Kulusevski. Which of them are still good value and which are now overpriced? So which of the stars from last year do we still think are good value? I would probably point to the defenders. I think Saka's gone up to maybe, I want to say 5.1 potentially. Bowen's gone up 5.2. Cancelo and Reece James are still hovering around 5 or just over. What are your thoughts on those sorts of players, Luke?
There's a midfield price point I don't really like, which is that for about 4.5 to about 5.5 million. So Bowen, I think if you get him at the right point, fine. But if you remember, like last year, you had Maddison at Leicester, who I see he was one I did pick and say I think he's going to go on a run, but he's just priced incorrectly in comparison to the 3. You can get a 3 mil. Well, Gallagher at 2.7 or 2.6. It's just you can't do it. You can't make that move. Whereas the defenders, Bowen at 5.1 or Van Dijk at 5.3. I'll take Van Dijk. I mean, it's just those price points are just slightly out. So yeah, for me, I think the defenders are still represent really good value because you get it comparatively to those similar priced midfielders and forwards. You're getting 200 points versus 150 to 180. So yeah, so defenders for me over those midfielders.
Cool. Questions from Neil Baker. Some interesting ones here, and it touches on the structure thing I want to talk about. So I'll answer this one first. But he says, formation 5-4-1, 5-3-2, or other. I think probably one of those two. I do think maybe 4-4-2 could have a part to play early as well, potentially, or 4-5-1. Definitely not three at the back, 100%. And structure, one or two premiums. It's really interesting, this question. We'll look at our drafts next after the questions, but I think I've got one in one and two in the other. Like I say, I'm just finding it really hard to pass up on Salah and Haaland at the moment. But I also want to make sure that when I build my team, if it looks like we're going to have one of those seasons, let's just say Salah and Haaland are banging in goals left, right, and centre. There's lots of goals being scored. There's not many clean sheets, etc., etc. And I want to be able to get to the premiums, at least a second premium, without having to use two transfers. That if that makes sense. So I was contemplating, if I do only go for the one, for example, it's keeping a bit of money back so I can hop from potentially, someone like, say, Robertson gets injured, let's just say, or, Trent. I can hop from Trent to Haaland or Kane in one move rather than have to release funds elsewhere to go. So I think structurally that's what I'm thinking about, is if I do only go for one, is keeping a bit of money in the bank, like the 1.4 or 1.5, whatever I would need to enable that move, because there's nothing worse than having to use two transfers to get a player in you want. So structurally, that's my take. I'll come back to you guys now. Is other questions? Trent and Cancelo still worth the money? Absolutely. Brennan Johnson, too much value to pass up, surely? Absolutely. Who's your enabler? Sub 3 million tip for the season. I think we touched on Johnson. I think around 3 million. We've mentioned Norgard, Bilin, Bissouma, Zinchenko, loads of players there. I do think Yates at 2.2, Akoni 2.3 up front as well. I did look at the defenders, but I don't see the point in going for a cheap defender unless you sort of manage to stumble on, I don't know, Simicat if Robertson gets injured potentially. And how many transfers are you aiming to have left post World Cup? I think it's something like 16 or 17 games we played, so well over half the season left. I'm hoping for 30 transfers left. So, but just on the structure point there, guys, Luke, I'll ask you first on that premium side. What are your thoughts on that team structure part?
I agree with everything you've said. There's one alternative view to it. So I don't like wasting transfers, absolutely not. But I think early doors, and this is in the seasons where I've done really well, there's also, as much as there's premiums that are firing, you will know the sub 2.5 million person who's going to have a storming season after about 4 or 5 games.
It's a really good point.
And having the structure so that you can do it in one is going to prevent you from making that move, because you just be like, well, they're cheap and I don't need to free up the funds. Actually, the reverse logic is it could force you to jump to that 2.3 million striker, and then you're set for the rest of the season because you've got them in early. And to win TFF, you've got to get those players first, because 2 weeks later, everybody's got them. So I wouldn't early doors. I mean, post-Christmas, absolutely with you. The structure is far more important. But pre-Christmas, if you are using a transfer and it's got two positives, that you get on the cheapest player who's playing, but you also get that informed player, I would advocate that, as long as you've not burned 10, 15 already. So if you're under sub 10, then 2 transfers is all right in the first half, so long as that's the scenario. Don't just do it for luxury.
Yeah, I don't know. I completely agree. I think it's a really good point. Anything to add there, Carl, on that?
No, nothing to add. I think both your points are valid.
Okay.
and are pretty good. I must admit, I don't like leaving money in the bank. Maybe because I'm tight, and I always sort of think in my mind, if you sort of go down and go from the beginning, and if you want to save money, say you can make say one transfer at a different stage, it means that the play that you're having that extra on is in many ways worth that money. So if you sort of said I wanted the option of pushing one of my defenders up to Haaland in front, but I need to keep in the bank 1.4 million, that's really putting your defender at 7 million instead of 5.5.
Yeah.
And therefore
Fair point.
you should think slightly differently. But yeah.
Okay. I'm going to skip a few questions that we've already asked around. We've already answered around formation and what is the best way to set up your starting 11. We said that exactly, and it's to look for the long term, and that's it really. Ewan McConnell says, do you think going slightly cheap at the back, Arsenal Spurs, is a good way to unlock more funds going forward? I definitely think that there's a thing there with Arsenal and Spurs. I think they're underpriced personally on both of those. If you think you can get Romero, Dyer, Tomiyasu, Zinchenko and Doherty for about 15 million, I think that's incredibly cheap. When that would be 2.5 of the of the other premiums. I think that's really cheap. So yeah, an FPL bookworm, Doherty and Perisic are both cheap in TFF. We take a punt on one of them in this format, despite their rotation risk. I think we need to see the start. I think they're tough ones to start with. If I was going to start with one, I'd probably start with Doherty. Oh, it's tough though because Emerson Royale is still there as well. I think if Emerson Royale goes, I would start with Doherty at 3.4 million. I think he's that good. And Perisic, I think we need to see a bit more because they've still got Sessegnon and Reguilon is still there as well, I think. So I don't think Perisic has played yet in pre-season. I may be wrong, but I don't think he has. Gerald Bucklands, this is a question, Luke, you mentioned earlier. He said, is everyone basically with 5 at the back, 4 best defenders and Perisic, 2 of Haaland, Salah, Kane and Son, fillers everywhere else, and then deleting the app until January? You kind of mentioned this earlier. Luke's put his thumbs up. Carl, have you got anything to add there from Gerald?
It seems a good strategy.
It does seem a good strategy. We could have just wrapped up this podcast in about 10 seconds flat, couldn't we? Dennis asks, is Haaland a trap? I consider not starting with him to be different, or is this too much of a risk? I think, I've got slightly different views on this to Carl by the sound. I do actually take ownership quite seriously when I'm looking at players. So if I'm tossing up between Haaland and Kane, just for example, obviously, it's a different discussion between Haaland and Robertson. But between Haaland and Kane, half the game own Haaland. He's home to Bournemouth in game week 2. I mean, he could absolutely run riot, right? And with that ownership in mind, I think it's a risk not to go with him personally. But Luke makes some really good points about players who don't start the season well. I would say Aguero started well, didn't he, when he signed for Man City? But that was like 10 years ago now, in all fairness. Lots of questions around big at the back. Expensive forwards, big at the back. So big at the back is what we advocate. And then we had a few questions in our WhatsApp group and off Simon on email. Simon asks, Luke discussed pick a set and forget team and then walk away for a few months. So he's already mentioned, as part of the obvious, do we have any suggestions for teams we should look if we adopt this tortoise strategy? I think we've probably again touched on those, haven't we? These kind of budget mids and stuff. He also asks, throughout last season's TFF pods, I mentioned limiting the downside and amplifying the upside is an important strategy. Do you have any suggestions how to do this for this season? Again, it's a bit more, well, going for Haaland ahead of Kane or Son, for me, is one way of kind of doing that. But I would say this first half of the season, I know it sounds like a broken record, but all you want is a rock solid team. That's just all you want at the start. So for the second half of the season, I think there's you can look at the ownership in the higher kind of echelons of the overall ranks to protect yourself, but then you can also look elsewhere then in terms of looking for the upside. Carl, in last season's pre-season, you gave a shout to Conor Gallagher. Who is this season's Conor Gallagher? What a question. Go on, Carl.
Well, and let's like this. To me, it's like winning the lottery and then somebody saying to you, what are the numbers next week? It's like, I was fortunate last year that I had my eye on him a little bit from the season before, from when he played at West Brom. And then I saw him in pre-season just before we come on the pod, and he looked fantastic. I haven't had that many visuals of players or anybody on my radar, so I haven't really got anybody. But the players that we mentioned before, he's not going to be like Gallagher. But I'm just I'm not in love with him as such. But like Norgard, I just think, how can you play without him?
How can you play without him? Flip my neck. That's a statement, Carl.
Well, yeah, he'll be in the team of the season. Then that's near enough guaranteed. So,
I mean, can I jump in on this one, because I've just while we've been talking there, like I was just looking at some of these questions and they're all fairly related. Just jumping back to Carl's slide on the optimum team. When it comes to the end of the season, I am almost certain that it's going to be Alisson, Van Dijk, Cancelo, Trent, a cheap 3 million defender. He's got Gahey in there, but it could be
Zinchenko.
Right, probably Zinchenko. You're probably then going to have one of Salah or Haaland or KDB or Kane, but I don't think it will be Kane or Son. I think it'll be one of those three, because they are the best three players in the league. I like Son and I like Kane, but I think they're a tier down. And then you're going to have Norgard. I think you will probably have Ramsey. So I think if and if you think Carl's team is one that's got there with 0 transfers, like, why wouldn't you just start with those players in all 3 views, pretty much all the way through that feature in every podcast? It's those same 4 or 5 defenders and keepers, and it's the same midfielders. So you've got about 3 places, really, because it's a game of value. It's not a game of having the best player. It's pick 7 or 8 players that you don't need to move for the whole season. If you've got that and you rotate 3 players that you're transferring, and using Paul's McNulty's daisy chain theory, you just daisy chain with those other 3 players, and that's where you want the flexibility in the budget. But it's the 6, 7, 8 players that are static. I think you can get pretty close to picking that team.
You know what I think is the problem, and this is what masks how good that strategy is that people are rifling through transfers in the first half of the season. So if you played this strategy, your overall rank and your mini league rank would probably be quite low, because you're being the tortoise, right? You're just quietly accumulating a decent number of points, whereas people are banging in Salah's, Haaland, Kane's. They're getting all the goals, they're getting all the points early. But this is where in the second half of the season, then we just slide in, overtake them very easily and very quickly by switching to a massive block defense for a 5-for-1 and scoring 200 points in like 2 weeks. And suddenly you shoot up the leagues. But I think the problem is that it's having the discipline, and it's the same in Sky, right? It's the exact same issue. Is having the discipline not to let your overall rank and your mini league position in September and October make you panic and go, "Oh, I'm 100 points behind," because what's probably happened is you've used 2 transfers and your rival has used 15. But that's the issue for it's not the issue. That's the story for me in what goes on.
Yeah. Shout out to Ian Parron, because he always does it in Sky and Telegraph. He always appears with about how many transfers you got, Ian? Oh, I've got 47 transfers. What? Oh, he's bought the 7 again for being famous, but thing that always gets labelled at you, isn't it, Fergie?
There we go. Buy the extra ones, don't I? We've answered Simon's questions on premiums, and he also asked from now to the next TFF pod. So probably, I'm trying to think actually. I think there's an international break in there after 10 game weeks, I want to say. To probably try and squeeze one in then. How many transfers are you expecting to invest or spend by then? So Luke, we know yours. Yours is going to be apparently like 1 or 2. Carl, how many transfers do you expect to expend in the opening 10 game weeks or so?
1.
1.
1. But no, probably about 1. The only transfers except for the one that I've sort of like looked at already, I'd only make a transfer if I've got a player injured or they're not starting. That's what I find the hardest bit about the beginning of the season is who's started. And once that, I'm really trying to lock it in and not make transfers which are like luxury transfers. So I keep that as low as possible. But I end up making transfers more because the players got injured or whatever. But if no injuries, no transfers. That's my strap line.
Good stuff. No, I can't. I can't argue. So I'm just reading through the WhatsApp group for all the questions, but we've think we've answered most of them. One, and this is probably for newer players to TFF off Kieran. For those of us new to TFF but familiar with Sky, what are the key differences between the two fantasy formats? And should we adopt a different plan and strategy approach to TFF? I think we touched on it a number of times, but there's no captains in Telegraph. So if you miss a Salah hat-trick, Haaland hat-trick in game week 2, which Luke's going to miss, it's 17 points, which sounds a lot, but over the season it's really not. So you can afford to miss hauls in Telegraph, and the strategy is big at the back, bonus magnets, hold your transfers. And this is why we only pod a couple of times in the first half of the year, because the advice is don't do anything, pick a rock solid team.
The only other thing to say is in FPL, it's you transfer prior to the game week and you're stuck with it. In Sky, you can transfer up to the start of the first game. In TFF, you can transfer up to the kickoff. So you can exploit, often where in Sky it might be a 3-for-1, in TFF it may well be a 4-for-1, because you can transfer in a player who's playing at 5:30 after the 3 o'clock game has finished or kicked off. So I think that for those that are new, that's something that's really important. If you're going to win, you will need to have those transfers on the game day between a game. I don't think you could win it if you didn't make 1 or 2 transfers to bring in players like that. Just make sure you don't do it 2 minutes too late because you're down in a basement drinking with your mates.
Thank you for the reminder there, Luke. And only do that in the second half of the season. Make sure you daisy chain. These 4-for-1s are daisy chain moves. They're not go back to the original player.
Can I add one other thing?
Please,
about the differences? There's also no wild card. So your transfers are more precious. It's not like if your team's a bit dodgy, you can change it all. So you need a more solid and stable team, and transfers are more precious.
Very, very well. A very good point. Very well made there, Carl. Okay, we've come to the business end. Let's have a look at our draft so far. It'd be interesting to see how it's changed after the couple of hours discussion we've just had. Got yours firstly up, Carl. Do you want to run us through your current team?
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't come as much of a surprise to people, considering what we talked about. Alisson in goal, a back 5, starting with Robinson, TAA and Matip, Cancelo and James, and then in midfield, Norgard.
What? Norgard? Who's he played for?
And Brendan Johnson, and up front I've got Salah and Mitrovic. This is provisional and subject to change as more information sort of comes out. I've got one transfer penciled in where James may move out for Callum Wilson in September. But yeah, apart from that, I'm really happy with the team. I've never been as happy with my team at the start of the season as I am today, because I don't think there's many risks there. I will tinker with it because both of you made some fantastic points about some players, particularly Ramsey
Yeah.
and that Notts Forest centre forward, one IE or whatever it is. I may have to tinker a little bit around that, think about that a bit deeply. But apart from that, I think those players are starting 11. Matic's a bit of a question mark, depends on the Community Shield. But I'd hope that they all start and they're regulars. See you at Christmas, guys.
So if you're talking about, we've mentioned it a few times, having a rock solid starting team, just take a look at your screen now, and that is a rock solid starting team. And this is what tackle bonus has brought into the game. It's brought these players like Norgard and Billing into the game, which is fantastic because it makes it a really interesting, game. Let's move on, Luke. So you've got a couple of drafts. Do you want to talk us through them?
Yeah, I've changed it slightly as we've been talking, but structurally very little. So I've got Alisson in goal in both teams. I've got Trent, Cancelo, Van Dijk in both teams. I've got Gahey, but that's a placeholder, which I think I'm looking at it now, and it'll probably be Zinchenko. And then I'm either looking at Reece James. Well, I talked about it earlier. So it's one of James, Chilwell, Laporte, Diaz, or Robbo. We'll take that last spot. Midfield, I've got Johnson and Ramsey. On the screen, I've got Bruno, but I've just swapped Bruno to Norgard. I've got Diaz up front, and then I've got one spot which will be one of Salah, KDB, or Haaland. But I think it will be KDB, as we talked about, because there's the tackle bonus. Best player in the league. Salah, I'd love it to be KDB and Salah is what I'd really like, but I just can't work out quite how I'm going to get there. I do have 800k in the bank. I know Carl doesn't like that, but that also means that KDB, I can rotate any of those premiums. So if Harry Kane suddenly goes off, I can swap KDB to Kane for one transfer pretty easily. I also don't mind dropping, Reece James down to Chilwell. If Chilwell's going to start the season, and again, I don't know, James will become Chilwell to free up the money, and Diaz may get an upgrade to Salah because Salah is a better player. It's just, I think Diaz is really good value. So structurally, all of my drafts have got that, and there's sort of, as I talked about, there's three positions that I'm looking at rotating, which is the Zinchenko one, the KDB one, and the Diaz one are the ones that I'm looking at rotating. The rest are pretty much set.
Very good, and again, completely rock solid teams here as well. Very well played, Luke. I can see him up against it this year. Normally I look at my team and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to kill it, but I'm a bit more reserved this time around. I've done a couple of drafts. I've done one with one premium and one with two. So my draft with one premium, Alisson in goals, Reece James, Cancelo, Trent, Laporte and Robertson, massive at the back, Norgard, Johnson, Wilson and Bruno Guimaraes, and then Salah up front, which I think I'm probably leaning more towards that style of team rather than the two now, after all my gump about Haaland. And then the one where I can afford two premiums, Alisson in goals, Zinchenko, Cancelo, Trent, Cucurella. Obviously, that is dependent on whether he goes to Man City. And Robertson, and then Johnson, Guimaraes, and Pereira, but that could be anyone, around that price range, and then Salah and Haaland up front. I think because of the discussion we just had, I'm very much erring towards the 5-4-1 formation. I think I like the look of Ramsey and a couple of others as well. So yeah, good shout on Ramsey, Luke. So I'm erring towards the one with one premium, which, if I swapped out Wilson for Ramsey, It's not a bad old team there, is it? So that's my draft at the moment. And we have an exclusive. Peter Marshall, last year's £5,000 TFF overall winner, Fantasy Football Hub Premium member. We have 2 drafts from Peter. His first one has got 2 premiums. Interestingly, his second one has got 3 premiums. But let's just touch on his first one first. Edison in goals. Dyer, we mentioned. Really good value, 3.2. Trent, Chilwell, Laporte, and Trippier. He's got Trippier in both teams. So he likes Trippier. He has got Ericsson, who we haven't even mentioned, actually. I can't remember his price. Is he? I can't think of his price. Maybe 3.8. We'll have to double check his price.
He is. I mean, if he starts, we should have talked about him.
That's a good point. Yeah,
he is probably my favourite, other than Steve Malbronk. What a legend in this game.
Well, normally he's 5 million odds, isn't he? Because he's that good.
Ericsson. All those years we've had the Ericsson, Dele Alli, Kane debate. Which one do you go for? I always went Ericsson, and I always felt like I had the best because he was the best value. He was drip, 5 points as opposed to 2.7 points, and it's great player if he starts.
So he's 4 million and he's 5% owned at the moment. Bruno Ramirez and Pereira in midfield, and then Haaland and Salah. So that is his one with 2 premiums, and his one with 3 premiums. Ramsdale in goal, Laporte, Van Dijk, Dyer and Trippier, Wilson, Ramirez and Brennan Johnson, and then Salah, Haaland and Kane. So that is Peter's current thinking. He's currently on holiday in Greece, spending his money. So he's the one to listen to because he won the whole thing last season. Very, very well played, Peter. Any thoughts, gents, on Peter's team?
It's interesting how different it is, and I mean, there's a point we probably haven't made that if you follow the tactic that I think me, Fergie, and Carl are all going with, which is very much big at the back, we are playing a very safe game, which is going to put us in a good position. But you don't come first without a little bit of a gamble.
Yeah.
Somebody will take a risk. I mean, you were talking about potentially chucking a Spurs block or something. Somebody will get off to an absolute flyer by doing that. And if they're a good player, then they will use 3-4 transfers to remove that block and get to the 2.3 starting forward, the 2.5 defender that looks like they're absolutely smashing it, the 2 informed biggies, and then they've got a 50-point head start on all the other good players. So it depends what you want to do, whether you want to be in that we've got a chance pack kind of, I think, which is the way me, you and Carl are going. What was the guy, Dan Sherwood, wasn't it, who had first, second, third, fifth,
he's flying on
something for so far for the sea. I felt sorry for him. I mean, he still finished top 10 with about 3 teams, I think, but can't feel that sorry. I'd love to know what he started with last year, but I bet it was a little bit different, but consistent across the board. So it is interesting. So I like what he's done. I like the Newcastle players. I think they are really underpriced, which I think we mentioned earlier. I don't think the team with the 3 premiums will do that well. I think the premiums is about being on them at the right time. That's where the fixtures really come into play. But yeah, it's solid, but it's different tactics, which I like.
Good stuff. And Luke, even though we haven't got it obviously on screen, you've just knocked together a quick budget 11 with about 10 million left in the bank.
Yeah. So all this chat of budget. So I did a team, and it still has 2 premium defenders in because their points per million that they were up there. Pope in goal, Zinchenko, Guehi, Van Dijk, Cancelo, with then Norgard, Ramsey, Bissouma and Johnson. And then it's got Dan James and Diaz up front, 9.7 million, which means, you're talking about money in the bank.
Money in the
bank.
You
can pretty much remove any player and go to any player. You can pretty much move any 2 players and get to any 2 premiums. But they're all, in my opinion, they're all nailed on starters. who you could just set and forget. So you could start with something like that and go, well, I know I'm going to use 2 transfers, but I'm just going to wait and see, does Haaland kick off, and I'll take the potential hat trick I miss. But I know that if he starts firing, I've got him. And but if it's KDB, well, hey, I'm in a much better place, because they're all going to be going, oh, can I lose him? And I'm just like jumping straight on. So I think that, yeah, I mean, I'd be really interesting to come back to that team to just see how far off the pace it is, because I think all of those players, bar Cancelo and Van Dijk, I think they're all underpriced.
I agree, and really good stuff there, Luke. Thank you so much. So yeah, that is it from us, I think, for pre-season. Fantastic chat, chaps. I really enjoyed that. It's great to be back. Great to be back with you guys. Great to be back with a brand new Premier League season just around the corner, with all of us oozing with confidence with how we're going to attack this season. One of you needs to beat me. It's been a while now, guys. One of you needs to, climb over that hoarding and take it by the scruff of the neck. So hoping, as I say, the way you've both chatted this evening and the teams you've both showed me, I'm a bit in awe, a bit dumbstruck. So this could be your season, guys. Thank you so much to everyone watching and listening. We really appreciate all the interaction, all the questions, all the retweets, all the everything. Thanks to so much in everyone in our Fantasy Football Hub premium members group. There's so much. I think there's about 60 or 70 members in there now chatting TFF all day, every day. It's getting very lively in there. There's some fantastic players. Basically, all the best Telegraph players are in this group. If you're not in it, you seriously want to consider signing up to being a premium member, because just for the chat alone, and the tips and the camaraderie and everything else, if you are interested in joining as a premium member, click the link below on the YouTube and join in, because you will have a good Telegraph season. You cannot fail to not do that. Thank you, Carl and Luke, for all your preparation, for your time, for you putting up with me with all my technical difficulties that we always have at the start of every pod. What's that? I can't hear you. Luke, turn your mic. Oh, it's me. Carl, I can't turn it. Oh, it's me. Sorry, guys. It's always me. But yeah, we had fun and games again earlier with me after I upgraded my operating system. Luke, where can people find you or get hold of you if they wanted to?
So yeah, in a number of the WhatsApp groups, both the sort of Sky and TFF one, but yeah, otherwise so at FPL_equation is my Twitter handle. So that's the place to get me on Twitter.
And a really good point as well, Luke. If you do join as a Premium Hub member, you get to go in every chat group as well. You can go in Telegraph, Sky, Dream Team, FPL. Whatever you want, you can go in all of them if you want. Good point there as well, Luke. Thank you, Luke, for your time. It's much appreciated. Carl, where can people get hold of you?
Yeah, I think the best place will probably be on Twitter at Darkish Jungle. I don't tweet a lot, but I'm there. If someone asks me a question, I'll always get back to them. Yeah, and apart from that, I'm just really excited, for the weather to change and for the football to start.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carl. And again, all the data we show is all Carl's work. So thank you so much for that, Carl. It's absolutely superb. My handle on Twitter is at FFH_Fergie. And you can get hold of me there. I'm not great on Twitter, I gotta be honest. I don't go on it very often, but I try my best to answer where I can. This video recording will be on the Fantasy Football Hub, Sky and TFF YouTube channel. So if you play Sky and Telegraph, these both go on the same channel. The podcast version is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcast. If you like what you watched on the YouTube, please press like. Remember to subscribe to the channel at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you enjoyed your listen, please jump on the podcast. Leave us 5 stars. Leave us a comment. It'd be much appreciated. Our handles on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are at FFH_HQ. Please follow and feel free to ask any questions. Our website is fantasyfootballhub.co.uk. We've got all sorts of stuff on there for Telegraph. Paul McNulty, fantastic player, is writing some articles for us as well. He's also writing them on behalf of the Telegraph. If you go to telegraph.co.uk/fantasy-sports, Paul is writing lots of tips there as well. Thank you so much to FF Stuff, as usual. Lots of data, lots of graphics from Frank at FF Stuff. If you sign up to the hub, you will have everything you need to dominate your Telegraph mini league. We say it every single year. Join the hub and win your mini league. From all of us at Fantasy Football Hub, the very, very best of luck for the opening weeks of the season. We'll be back in a couple of months. Stay safe and good night all.